By the mid-1960s, the Beatles were at the height of their power. Every new release wasn't just a hit, it was an event. But beneath the fame and innovation, John Lennon was quietly searching for something deeper, something real, something that couldn't be found in screaming fans or studio perfection. That search led him to one man, Bob Dylan, the folk poet who had turned words into weapons and who Lennon once called the only one I ever truly respected. But what started as admiration would soon blur into accusation when Dylan claimed that one Beatles song sounded identical to one of his own. In 1964, John Lennon and Bob Dylan met for the first time in New York. Both were cultural revolutionaries, but from different worlds. Dylan, the voice of protest and truth. Lennon, the voice of pop and irony. That night, they smoked, joked, and talked about songwriting. John later described Dylan as the man who opened my eyes. After that meeting, the Beatles began to shift, away from boyish pop and toward introspection. Songs like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away and Norwegian Wood carried Dylan's fingerprints, acoustic guitars, cryptic lyrics, and a sense of raw confession. Even Lennon admitted, I was trying to be Bob. But Dylan noticed something else. He thought one song in particular went beyond influence. In 1965, the Beatles released Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, a mysterious, beautiful track on rubber soul. It was one of Lennon's most personal songs, full of double meanings, bitterness, and quiet humor. It marked a turning point, where the Beatles moved from love songs to life songs. But when Bob Dylan first heard it, he reportedly frowned. To him, it sounded eerily familiar. He said it was identical to one of his own songs, Fourth Time Around. Or rather, his song came first. Here's where things get murky. Both Norwegian Wood and Fourth Time Around were written around the same time, late 1965. Lennon's version came out first, on Rubber Soul in December. Dylan's Fourth Time Around appeared a few months later on Blonde in 1966. At first glance, that should settle it. Dylan copied Lennon, but Dylan insisted the opposite. He claimed that Lennon's song borrowed his melody and phrasing, that it was too close to be coincidence. Lennon later recalled, I remember hearing Fourth Time Around and thinking, what the hell? He's doing me doing him. It was a bizarre creative loop. Lennon had been inspired by Dylan's freewheelin' era, and now Dylan was throwing it back, parodying Lennon's attempt to sound like him. When you listen closely, the resemblance is uncanny. The melody lines mirror each other almost exactly. The pacing, the tone, even the phrasing of certain lines feel lifted straight from Norwegian Wood. Both songs feature a detached narrator, dry humor, and emotional distance. But while Lennon's tale was sly and domestic, a man's awkward night with another woman, Dylan's Fourth Time Around felt like a sardonic mirror, as if he were saying, you think you can do Dylan? Watch me do you. In interviews, Dylan's tone was cryptic. He never flat out accused Lennon of theft, but he called the songs identical, and once joked that Norwegian Wood sounded like Dylan with a sitar. It was the folk poet's way of reminding John that imitation had a cost. John Lennon was both amused and unnerved. He admired Dylan too much to dismiss him, but he also sensed a deeper message in Fourth Time Around. He later said, I didn't know if he was telling me off or just laughing at me. To Lennon, Dylan's song felt like a warning, a musical taunt that said, you can't out Dylan. But instead of anger, it sparked reflection. Lennon realized that he'd reached the end of imitation. If he wanted to grow, he had to find his own voice again. That realization shaped everything that came next, from In My Life to Strawberry Fields Forever. It was the moment he stopped chasing influence and started confronting himself. The Lennon-Dylan relationship was always a mix of admiration and competition. They shared mutual respect but also envy. Both were men defined by words, and both were terrified of losing control of them. Dylan once said of John, he had this need to prove himself, to be seen as deep, but he didn't have to prove anything. And John, in return, admitted, I envied him, the way he could say things without caring what people thought. Their connection was less friendship, more mirror, each seeing in the other what they lacked. Norwegian Wood and Fourth Time Around weren't just songs, they were conversations, two geniuses speaking through melody, challenging each other to dig deeper. Today, the so-called copying controversy feels almost irrelevant, because what came out of it was evolution. Lennon's fascination with Dylan pushed the Beatles into maturity, while Dylan's response pushed Lennon toward originality. Without that tension, we might never have gotten the honesty of Rubber Soul, the vulnerability of Help, or the introspection of Revolver. Years later, Lennon reflected on it with a smile. He wasn't accusing me. He was testing me, and he was right. I needed to stop being him and start being me. In the end, there was no feud, only inspiration traded between two artists who defined an era. Dylan's Fourth Time Around and Lennon's Norwegian Wood stand today as twin reflections, one folk, one psychedelic, both born from the same restless search for truth. Bob Dylan once said, "We were all borrowing from the same wind," and perhaps that's the real story, not who copied who, but how imitation became evolution. Because in trying to sound like Dylan, John Lennon rediscovered himself, and in mocking Lennon, Dylan reminded him why the world had listened in the first place.